warning to our viewers. What you are about to watch is based on a true story. This episode discusses the death of a child and the criminal case that followed. Some details are disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. December 13th, 2021. A 5-year-old girl had been missing for less than 24 hours when police body cameras captured the moment that shattered everyone inside that abandoned house. An officer's voice broke through the darkness. "We've got a body. Female child. Basement." The camera moved down old wooden stairs into the lower level of a vacant house in Phenix City, Alabama. The beam of light swept across the room. Then, everything changed. Because what officers found there was not just a missing child. It was the end of a case that had started as a frantic search, and the beginning of a truth so painful that even experienced investigators struggled to speak about it. Her name was Camry Holland. She was 5 years old, and investigators would later say she was not taken by a stranger who slipped into her home in the night. She was betrayed by someone who should have protected her first, her own mother. That is what made this case so hard for people to understand. The danger did not begin outside the family. It started close to home. And according to prosecutors, money was at the center of it. A child's safety was reduced to a transaction. A little girl's life was placed in the hands of a man with a disturbing past. And by the time police found her, it was already too late. This is the story of Camry Holland. A story about betrayal, missed warnings, a broken system, and the long road to justice. Welcome to Brian Crime Updates. Before we go deeper, subscribe to Brian Crime Updates, like this video, and tell us where you are watching from. Now, let's begin. December 2021. Across America, families were trying to return to normal life after almost 2 years of fear and uncertainty. Christmas lights were going up. Stores were filled with decorations. Children were counting the days until gifts, food, family, and holiday joy. In Columbus, Georgia, Camry Holland should have been doing the same. She should have been thinking about Santa. She should have been singing Christmas songs. She should have been talking about toys, school, snacks, and everything 5-year-olds usually care about. But inside one home, something else was happening. Her mother, Christy Sipple, was making phone calls. Those calls were not about holiday plans. They were not about school. They were not about protecting her daughter. According to investigators, those calls were part of a plan that would lead Camry into danger. 12 minutes away, across the state line in Phenix City, Alabama, Jeremy Tremaine Williams was waiting. He was 37 years old. He had a history that should have raised serious concern. He had once faced child abuse charges. He had also been connected to another heartbreaking case years earlier, involving the death of his infant daughter in Alaska. By December 2021, prosecutors would later argue that Williams was not a man who suddenly became dangerous overnight. They believed the warning signs had been there for years. Columbus, Georgia, and Phenix City, Alabama sit close together, divided by the Chattahoochee River. One side is Georgia, the other is Alabama. 2 cities, 2 jurisdictions, 2 sets of law enforcement agencies. And on the night this case began, that state line would become part of the investigation. An abandoned house on 15th Avenue in Phenix City would soon become the center of everything. It had once been connected to Jeremy Williams. By December 2021, it was empty. The windows were broken. The yard was overgrown. The place looked forgotten. But it would soon become the most important location in a case that crossed state lines and horrified everyone who touched it. By morning, what first looked like a missing child case in Georgia would turn into a homicide investigation in Alabama. 2 police departments, 2 states, 1 little girl, and one truth nobody wanted to believe. Camry Holland was born on November 23, 2016, in Columbus, Georgia. Just 20 days before her death, she had celebrated her 5th birthday, 5 years old. That is all the time she had. Family members described her as bright, loving, and full of life. Her smile stood out in every photo. It was the kind of smile people remembered after leaving the room. Her father, Corey Holland Sr., later used one word again and again when he spoke about his daughter: precious That word became part of how people remembered Camry. Because to those who loved her, she was not a case file. She was not a headline. She was a little girl who mattered. She was a daughter, a sister, a student, a child with a future. Camry came from a large blended family. She had siblings. She had relatives who loved her. She had people who expected to watch her grow up, start school, make friends, and become whatever she wanted to become. She liked the simple things children love: playing outside, singing songs, drawing, laughing, being around family. Teachers described her as eager to learn and happy to be around other children. She was at the age where every small skill mattered: writing her name, counting higher, learning letters, recognizing words. Each little moment was supposed to lead into a bigger life, but that life was stolen. And what makes this case so painful is the gap between who Camry was and what the adults around her allowed to happen. Her family later fought to keep her memory from being swallowed by the details of the crime. They wanted people to remember her smile, her personality, her innocence, her value, because the legal documents would describe the worst day of her life. But her family wanted the world to remember the 5 years before it. Behind that smile, though, there was a family situation that investigators would later examine closely. Camry's parents, Camry Holland Sr. and Christy Sipple, had separated while Camry was still young. The custody situation was complicated. Family court records remained private, but after Camry's death, disturbing concerns came into public view. Christy Sipple had primary custody. People close to the family later described instability around the home. Neighbors spoke of visitors coming and going. Others said they had seen signs that things were not right. Child welfare concerns had reportedly existed before, though the full details were not public. For Camry Holland Sr., the situation was painful. Friends described him as a father who wanted time with his daughter, a father who loved her, a father who would later fight to make sure the truth came out. But while family members worried, the system did not stop what was coming. And that is one of the questions that still hangs over this case. How many warning signs were missed? How many people saw small pieces of danger but never saw the full picture? How many agencies had information but not enough connection to act in time? By the final weeks of Camry's life, some people noticed changes. She seemed quieter at times, less open, less joyful. Those details were small in the moment, but after her death, they became haunting, because people began asking themselves the question every family member fears: was she trying to tell us something without knowing how? As this case moves into darker territory, take a moment to subscribe to Brian Crime Updates. We cover serious cases with care, respect, and attention to the facts. And if you believe stories like Camry's should never be forgotten, hit the like button so more people see this episode. Jeremy Tremaine Williams was born in Alabama in 1984. By the time his name became connected to Camry Holland, he had a past that investigators would later describe as deeply troubling. In 2009, Williams faced child abuse charges in Phenix City. That case moved through the court system for years. In 2012, he was acquitted, but that was not the only time his name had been linked to concerns involving children. In January 2005, in North Pole, Alaska, Williams' 1-month-old daughter, Nalia Trenice Williams, died under suspicious circumstances. Authorities found serious concerns, but her manner of death was listed as undetermined. The case went cold. Years later, after Camry's case, that earlier investigation would be mentioned again, because people began to ask a painful question. If that earlier case had ended differently, would Camry still be alive? That question has no easy answer. But it shows how dangerous gaps in the system become when cases cross states, agencies, and years. People who knew Williams gave mixed descriptions. Some called him quiet. Some said he kept to himself. Others described anger beneath the surface. But prosecutors would later paint a much darker picture. They argued that Williams knew how to move through communities without attracting enough attention. They believed he knew how to get close to vulnerable people. And they believed his connection to Christy Sipple became part of the danger facing Camry. At first, the relationship between Williams and Sipple may have seemed ordinary from the outside. But investigators later found communication that suggested something far worse. According to prosecutors, money was discussed, access was discussed, and Camry became the victim of a decision made by adults who should have protected her. That is the part of this case that hits hardest. This was not a stranger hiding in the shadows. This was not a random crime with no connection to the family. This was a betrayal. And investigators would later say that betrayal began before Camry was reported missing. On Sunday, December 12, 2021, families in Columbus were preparing for Christmas. But Christy Sipple and Jeremy Williams were communicating. Phone records would later become key evidence. According to court documents, there were multiple calls between them that evening. Prosecutors said the plan involved money. They said Sipple agreed to give Williams access to her daughter in exchange for payment. At first, the amount discussed was $2,500. Then, according to prosecutors, it changed. The final amount was lower, but no amount matters here, because the horror is not the number. The horror is that a child's safety was treated like something for sale. That night, Camry was taken from her home. Investigators believed she may have been asleep during part of the movement from Georgia to Alabama. She was taken to the abandoned house in Phenix City, the same house connected to Williams. The same house officers would search less than a day later. What happened inside that house became the center of the prosecution's case. The details were so disturbing that people in court cried when evidence was presented. For this reason, we will not repeat the most graphic parts here. What matters is this. Camry was harmed. She was killed, and investigators said Williams recorded evidence that later helped prove what happened. A forensic pathologist testified about the cause of death. Toxicology results showed drugs in Camry's system. Prosecutors said those substances were used as part of the crime. After Camry died, Williams tried to cover his tracks. Investigators said he locked the house and attempted to discard evidence. Then he went back to his life as if nothing had happened. That coldness became one of the most chilling parts of the case, because while investigators would later uncover the truth, Christy Sipple waited until morning to call police. At about 6:15 a.m. on December 13, 2021, she contacted the Columbus Police Department. She reported that Camry was missing. She claimed she had put Camry to bed around midnight. She said she woke up and found her daughter gone. She also claimed the front door was open. It sounded like a nightmare. Every parent fears. A child asleep at home. A door open. A sudden disappearance. Police responded quickly. They treated it like a missing child case. Officers secured the home. They questioned people. They searched the neighborhood. They brought in help. K-9 units joined the effort. Officers went door to door. People searched nearby areas. Every hour mattered. At first, the public saw a mother in fear. Sipple spoke like a devastated parent. She claimed Camry was the essence of her life. She acted like someone desperate for answers. But behind the scenes, investigators were already seeing cracks in her story. The phone records did not match the picture she was trying to present. Her communication with Williams raised immediate concerns. Then came a tip. Someone recognized Williams' name and connected him to the abandoned house in Phenix City. That information shifted the investigation across the state line. Columbus police began coordinating with the Russell County Sheriff's Office in Alabama. A team headed to the old house on 15th Avenue. It was dark when officers entered. Inside, they searched. Then, they went down into the basement. And there, they found Camry. Less than 18 hours after she had been reported missing, the search was over. But the homicide investigation had only begun. The case now had two urgent goals. First, process the scene. Second, locate Jeremy Williams. Investigators already knew he had a connection to the house. They also had reason to believe his vehicle had been in the area. By the morning of December 14th, less than 30 hours after Camry was reported missing, deputies found Williams at a hotel in Phenix City. He was arrested without a major public scene. But what investigators found after that would change the entire case. When police examined Williams' phone, they found evidence that prosecutors later described as devastating. They found material tied to the crimes. They found communication. They found details that helped connect Williams and Sipple, and the image of Christy Sipple as a frightened mother began to collapse. Text messages and phone records pointed investigators toward a transaction. They suggested this was not a surprise abduction. It was planned. For 2 weeks, investigators built the case. They tracked calls. They reviewed messages. They spoke to witnesses. They connected evidence from Georgia and Alabama. And by the end of December, they moved again. On December 28, 2021, Christy Sipple was arrested at her home in Columbus. At first, she faced a charge connected to failing to report a missing child. But more charges followed: felony murder, human trafficking, sex trafficking charges. The case had become something even darker than many first believed. Because investigators were no longer looking at a mother who failed to protect her child during an attack, they were looking at a mother accused of helping place her child in danger. In March 2022, a Russell County grand jury indicted Jeremy Williams and Christy Sipple. Williams faced multiple charges. Those charges included 4 counts of capital murder, along with other serious charges connected to the crimes. The capital murder charges covered different legal theories: murder of a child under 14, murder during a kidnapping, murder during abuse, and other charges tied to the facts prosecutors presented. He also faced charges connected to human trafficking, illegal material involving a child, conspiracy, and abuse of a corpse. Christy Sipple also faced severe charges. They included felony murder and trafficking-related counts, because prosecutors said she played a direct role in giving Williams access to Camry. Both cases carried life-changing consequences, and for Williams, the death penalty was on the table. While awaiting trial, Williams was placed under close supervision after concerns about his mental state in custody. The court process moved forward. Then, on March 13, 2024, Williams made a decision that surprised many people. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts. The judge asked why he would enter the plea knowing the death penalty remained possible. Williams said he wanted to move the process along, but Alabama law still required a jury process in a capital case. Even with a guilty plea, evidence had to be presented. The court had to create a record. The jury had to hear what happened. And the families had to sit through the pain again. On April 8, 2024, jury selection began. The judge warned jurors that the evidence would be disturbing, but no warning could fully prepare them. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence from Williams' phone. They also presented forensic testimony. The courtroom reaction was emotional. Some jurors cried, some looked away, others struggled to remain composed. The testimony was not easy for officers either. People who had spent their careers working violent cases still looked shaken, because this was not only a murder case, it was the murder of a 5-year-old child. The forensic pathologist confirmed Camry's cause of death and discussed drugs found in her system. He explained how those substances would have affected someone so small. The details were clinical, but the weight behind them was devastating. Meanwhile, Christy Sipple took a different route. On March 13, 2024, the same day Williams pleaded guilty, she accepted a plea deal. Prosecutors dropped the murder charges. She pleaded guilty to sex trafficking. That plea meant she faced up to 20 years in prison instead of the death penalty. For many people following the case, that outcome raised anger. They wanted harsher consequences. They wanted the court to treat her role with the same weight they felt in their hearts. But prosecutors moved forward with the plea, and Williams' trial continued. On April 12, 2024, after days of painful testimony, the jury reached its verdict. Jeremy Williams was found guilty on all counts. 4 counts of capital murder, additional charges tied to abuse, trafficking, conspiracy, illegal material involving a child, and abuse of a corpse. For Camry's family, the verdict mattered, but it did not repair what had been taken. After the verdict, her father spoke with emotion. He said the judgment was deserved. He urged the court to impose the death penalty. His daughter, he said, was too precious for what happened to her. That word again, precious, because that is how he saw her. Not as a victim in a case, not as a name in a headline, but as his daughter, the little girl with the bright smile, The child who should have had birthdays, school days, holidays, and a future. During sentencing, family members gave impact statements. They described the pain left behind. They described the hole in their lives. They described the child they loved and the future stolen from her. A woman from Williams' past also testified. She said he had harmed her when she was a young child. Her words added to the picture prosecutors had painted, a pattern, a history, a danger that had existed long before Camry's name became known to the public. After hearing the statements, Judge David Johnson delivered the sentence. For each of the 4 capital murder convictions, Williams received the death penalty. He also received life sentences and additional prison time for other charges. As Williams was led away, reporters asked why he did it. He gave no answer, no explanation, no moment of honesty, nothing that could give the family peace. 3 months later, on July 18, 2024, Christy Sipple was sentenced. She received 20 years in prison. She was fined $10,000. She was ordered to register as a sex offender upon release. Her sentence was backdated to the time she had already spent in custody. For some, the sentence felt too light. For others, it was at least a measure of accountability. But for Camry's father and family, no sentence could undo the loss. Because justice in court does not bring back a child. It does not restore birthdays. It does not restore first days of school. It does not restore bedtime stories. It does not restore a father's chance to watch his daughter grow up. Russell County District Attorney Rick Chauncey later reflected on the case that had stayed with his office for years. He visited Camry's grave, a quiet moment after a long legal fight. That image says a lot, because behind the court files, behind the legal arguments, behind the headlines, there was a grave, and in that grave was a little girl who should have been alive. After sentencing, Williams was moved to Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, where the state houses death row inmates. He became one of many people awaiting execution in Alabama. But death penalty cases often take many years. Appeals begin automatically. Legal challenges take time. And for families, the wait often stretches far longer than they expect. That means Camry's family may spend years hearing updates, motions, appeals, and delays. The case may remain open in the legal system long after the trial ends. That is one of the hard truths about capital cases. A sentence does not always mean immediate closure. Sometimes it means another long chapter begins. On December 22, 2021, just days before Christmas, more than 200 mourners gathered to say goodbye to Camry Holland. Family, friends, neighbors, law enforcement officers, people who had never met her but had been touched by her story. Sheriff Heath Taylor attended. District Attorney Rick Chauncey attended. The grief in that room was heavy. Camry's great-uncle spoke words that stayed with the community. Evil had entered their family. Evil had entered their community. But even in that grief, people came together. They stood with Camry's father. They stood with her siblings. They stood with the family left behind. The first Christmas without her must have felt impossible. A holiday meant for children became a season of mourning. In the months after Camry's death, the case forced hard conversations. Law enforcement agencies reviewed how missing child cases across state lines should be handled. Child welfare agencies reviewed procedures. People asked whether warning signs had been missed. They asked whether agencies shared enough information. They asked how a child with concerns around her family environment still ended up in the path of someone like Jeremy Williams. There are no simple answers, but there are lessons. Children need systems that talk to each other. They need adults who act when something feels wrong. They need family courts, police departments, schools, and child welfare agencies that do not treat warning signs as isolated problems. Because in cases like this, the danger often does not appear all at once. It appears in pieces: a strange visitor, a child acting different, a parent making risky choices, a person with a troubling past gaining access to vulnerable children, a call that feels wrong, a story that does not add up. Each piece alone may seem small. Together, they become a warning. For the officers who found Camry, the case left deep emotional marks. Columbus Police Sergeant Jane Edenfield, one of the officers connected to the discovery, later became associated with calls for better trauma support for officers working child homicide cases. That matters, because people often focus on the suspect, the victim, and the court. But the investigators who walk into those scenes carry the memory too. They see what others never have to see. They go home with images that do not leave quickly. And in cases involving children, the weight is even heavier. For Camry Holland Sr., keeping Camry's memory alive became a personal mission. In April 2022, still grieving, he spoke about the emptiness left behind. On November 23, 2024, what would have been Camry's 8th birthday, he organized a celebration of her life. There were balloons, there was cake, there were stories. It was a birthday party for a child who should have been there. That moment shows the pain of families after a crime like this. They do not stop loving the person they lost. They do not stop counting birthdays. They do not stop seeing the empty chair. They learn to carry grief into every year that follows. When people who knew Camry talk about her now, they often return to the same thing. Her smile. That is what they want remembered. Not the basement, not the court evidence, not the horror. Her smile, her life, her value, the little girl she was before evil touched her story. Today, Jeremy Williams sits on death row. Christy Sipple is serving her prison sentence. The courts have spoken, but for Camry, justice came too late. And the question that remains is bigger than this one case. How many warning signs are ignored because people think someone else will act? How many children stay in danger because systems do not connect fast enough? How many families see something wrong, but fear speaking up? Camry Holland's story is painful, but ignoring it would be worse. Because if her story teaches anything, it is this. Children need protection before tragedy happens. Not after. They need adults who pay attention. They need systems that move faster. They need communities that speak up. And they need the world to remember that every child's life has value beyond measure. If this case moved you, subscribe to Brian Crime Updates. Like this video. Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. And turn on notifications so you do not miss the next case update. Here on Brian Crime Updates, we tell these stories because victims deserve to be remembered, families deserve to be heard, and the warning signs should never be ignored.